And deeper down the rabbit hole we go. Ladies and gentlemen, I really want to thank you first and foremost for simply coming back just to listen to what I have to say about what's going on in the world. I think each of us needs to use our voice quite a bit more than we are right now, but we need to understand how to use our voice, because there's a lot of us using our voice, but it's not our real voice. We're regurgitating other people's voices and narratives, people that we've never met. And those people are probably regurgitating from people they've never met. So I think it's really important for us to have a conversation and continually check each other and keep ourselves in a form of equilibrium. I think the world is going through a massive transitionary period right now, and now is the best time for us to get involved with groups who are trying to up the level, in a sense, go to the next stratosphere, a whole nother dimension, if you will, of conversation, meaning taking the old paradigm, rendering it obsolete, not through war, but by building something better from the refuse of what it is that's really breaking down. So there's something breaking down, and I believe that it is reassembling itself. And that happens in the mind in this thing called criticality. The reason why I'm bringing all this up is because this is the deeper dive based upon the news that in Oregon, all drugs have been decriminalized. As of February 1st, 2021, now police cannot arrest you in Oregon if you have a small amount of whatever drug. It doesn't matter if it's heroin, methamphetamines, cocaine, you name it. It doesn't matter. You can't get arrested for it. Now, you can still get a $100 fine, which, okay, it's at least a step in the right direction. And the way they're actually looking at this is these people shouldn't be locked up in a cage. Let's say if you're caught with a joint in your pocket, you shouldn't be locked up. You shouldn't even be arrested. It shouldn't go on your record as some kind of criminal offense. So we're moving in the right direction in this sense and looking at it as how do we treat. So Oregon, they're looking at also basically taking tax revenue from the cannabis industry and setting up a program for the treatment of people who have addictions. I think this is awesome, and I think we need to turn our attention to something that I showed in Waking Infinity News, which was what they're doing in Portugal. In Portugal, as you see, they're teaching people how to play, how to use their bodies, enjoy the little things in life. Remember that life is a playground, and a lot of the times we get addicted to these substances because we haven't been able to find the joy in our system. Now, I think that's also very much so a testament to the fact that we are living in a system that is feeling increasingly more like slavery. You can go through any of the other deep dives, the ones where I talk about the Great Reset and where we're headed with trace and track technology, all that kind of jazz. But I think the main thing we really need to look at also is, instead of always blaming the outside world and never looking within, we also really have to look at what do we have available to us that can get us out of these great scourges of our society. And one of them is addiction. If you've known anyone who has dealt with addiction, it is incredibly difficult to watch, and it's very, very difficult to have an addiction and to overcome it. If any of you have gone through some kind of substance abuse or addiction to, it could be anything, even pornography. It could be addiction to things that on the surface, they don't seem like they're an issue, and then they turn into obsessive compulsive disorder, washing your hands, different things like trying to control our weight through purging and starving ourselves. The bottom line behind all of this is there is an issue that goes deeper than the way it appears on the surface. So the act itself is pointing towards some kind of lack of self-love within us. So this is what we need to really work on. And the way that I want to speak about this is, as you saw in Portugal, they were teaching movement, helping people overcome all this by teaching them how to play and enjoy the little things in life. And in that, there's intrinsic rewards, and it also comes out as a balance in our hormonal, let's say, ratios, and also our neurochemical ratios. So the first thing we're going to look at today is movement. Now, many of you may know that I've been into movement for quite some time. I have done a little bit of movement with Paul Chek building rock stacks. I've done movement with Naudi Aguilar in functional patterns, and I've done movement training with Rafe Kelly with Evolve Move Play. So I'm going to stop right there. There's something very interesting about Rafe Kelly with Evolve Move Play and Naudi Aguilar with functional patterns. I've trained with both of them right around the same time, and I noticed that they both have similar philosophies that overlap a little bit, like in the Vesica Pisces, but most of their circles are outside of their similarities, meaning on the one side, this is just my interpretation, Naudi Aguilar and functional patterns, they focus on what is called biotensegrity. It's a lot about the fascial system, the myofascial system, and how the fascial system wants to move. Like if I want to turn this way and grab something, you see what happens to this side of my body and it starts to move back that way. But that's not just because I'm moving this part of my body and it turns the rest of my body. It's a trunk rotation. So it's called the transverse abdominis, and this is a trunk rotation. So I'm also utilizing my right latissimus dorsi to almost do that rowing motion back this way, so I can do a pushing, more chest-based motion over here to grab something. Now it's very minute, doing this all day long isn't going to make you look like Arnold, but it is really important, as Naudi Aguilar points out. The reason why he's really focusing on this functional patterns is to show that many of us are playing outside of the bounds of our range of motion. Many of us are picking things up and bending over in ways that are not really structurally sound. It's not the way this vehicle was meant to move, and it's not the most sustainable way that it was meant to move. So that could seem overly rigid, but the thing is there are a lot of us that we simply haven't learned how to move correctly. Not going to blame the outside world, and we're not going to blame the individual either, because really when you're stuck in a system that just constantly bombards you with you need to work and you need to do this, and barely have time to do any of your own research and really ask questions like, why does my back hurt? Oh, it could be any number of reasons. Maybe I'm just getting older, whatever. We also need to see that there's a balance between the external and the internal, and this is why we need community support, education, and personal empowerment, so we can attack, in a good way, both the outside and the inside worlds, and this is where the real solutions come up. So that was what would look like a very rigid approach to health. There's a formula to it, and you focus on the biotensegrity of the body. And I'll get into biotensegrity, and I'll show you guys this nifty device and how the body actually works in a second. But then there's Rafe Kelly on the other side. Now, Rafe Kelly has evolvemoveplay.com. So functionalpatterns.com, evolvemoveplay.com. You'll notice that Rafe Kelly, he started in parkour. Notice this is how you revision urban settings for play. Like, how do you take that wall and that fence and turn it into a jungle gym? Well, he noticed, why aren't we just doing this in nature? There's so many more variables in nature. There's so much more aromatherapy in nature. The ground is so uneven. Your body has to work that much harder at all the nuances and the dynamics just to stay focused on the task at hand. Whereas in a gym, that pull-up bar is going to hold you perfectly. You know that bicep curl bar is the exact same movement every single time. Your body will start to get bored. This is not what we want to do. We want to reintroduce play. So there's Evolve Move Play on this side, where Rafe is saying, listen, play is how we've all learned how to use our bodies. If you go back into the mammals, evolutionarily, they all play and they grapple with one another. And this is why he really says that grappling and wrestling and, things along those lines, you're challenging yourself not on, let's say, a pull-up bar or even a tree that's static. You have another human who's problem solving against you. So as you move to it, it's moving away from you, and you need to use in the moment problem solving skills to engage with this problem solving apparatus in front of you. It really, really turns on the mind, not just the neurons, but the entire mind. So you have the Naudi Aguilar functional patterns using your body within the confines of what's healthy and what obeys biotensegrity. On the other side, you have play. How do you slightly bend the rules? How do you bend slightly outside of those rules? And how do you use play and ingenuity and novelty rather than the formula to begin to crack ourselves outside of rigid behaviors and patterns? This is where I'm going with this, because now when I'm talking about movement and how in Portugal they're using jump rope and those kinds of things as forms of getting people to enjoy play, I'm taking it as deeply as I can because movement has been my forte for many, many years. So the difference between walking on a flat surface and walking on an uneven surface should be obvious, but it's not. You have a talus. It's basically where your shin bones connect with your ankle and the rest of your foot. And it can move in such nuanced and complex ways that when you use your feet on uneven surfaces, especially barefoot, where you can grip the ground with your toes, it's sending novel information through the body all the way up to the brain. Now, here's a guy named Stephen Jepson, and he showed that what he was finding was people over the age of 65 are, let's just say, far more likely to die from falling and breaking their hip. And it's just something with the statistics. Past the age of 65, it just skyrockets the morbidity rate of breaking a hip if falling. And so this is a big issue. Now, what Stephen Jepson started showing people, mind you, he has the website neverleavetheplayground.com, which I think is just a brilliant name. And again, it brings out that play. So he noticed that all he had to do was seat people on, into a chair, and there's two buckets, one filled with tiny toys that you can pick up with your toes and the other empty. So you sit there and you use your right foot and you're just picking up things out of one bucket, putting them into the other. Not only are you engaging your body to lift with your hips and really engaging all the muscles around the hips to keep them from being so stiff, you're also using the tiny tactile fibers to pick things up with your toes. Just that act in and of itself started causing people to regain their balance. And what he would do is once that got too easy, he would stand them up. Now you're standing and you have to stand on one foot while you're using your other one to grab objects out of one bucket, drop them into the next one. The next thing he did, once that got too easy, for people over the age of 65, mind you, he put the buckets on top of the chair. So now he showed that you really have to lift your leg up and you really have to use your balance to do this task. But they were able to do it. They were able to learn this past the age of 65. And the most incredible thing was, not only did they regain balance and start regaining some mobility health, but what they noticed was their neurocognitive decline, things like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and multiple sclerosis, other things that are neurodegenerative diseases, began to halt, and some of them began to reverse. This is also something that's being studied with psychedelics. Psychedelics are known to, you can go into removing amyloid plaques, all those things, but really what we're looking at with psychedelics is that they're causing for neuroplasticity and neurogenesis. Neurogenesis is the birth of new brain cells, and neuroplasticity is the reorganization of connectivity of those brain cells. Very, very important. So check out Stephen Jepson, check out Rafe Kelly, check out Naudi Aguilar. If you're more into the female influence, please check out Katie Bowman, and she has Move Your DNA, is a book called Move Your DNA, and I think it's nutritiousmovement.com. Please look into her work because she's talking about this, but more directly aligned for women. I'm going to try and get some podcasts with these brilliant individuals. But I promised you that I was going to talk about biotensegrity before I move on to the next section, because we have quite a bit more here. Think of the fascial system in your body. You have bones, right? These dowels represent the bones. And then you have fascia that connects all of it. Now, when you look at the fascia, your knees, right, your thigh bones aren't connected to your shin bones and stacked on top of it with the knee like a brick on top of another brick. They're actually, your fascia pulls away because of the design. None of the dowels or none of your bones are actually touching one another. Yes, there's cartilage there, but it's not pressurizing against one another. If you have healthy fascia with a healthy posture and gait cycle and all of that, it will actually pull you into your correct posture. And it's only through repetitive trauma, sitting is repetitive trauma, to the body, or any repetitive motion, and even this is psychological as well. You do the same thing too much, you're not learning enough, you're getting into a groove where you need to do the same thing just to start feeling normal. This is why I'm talking about addiction, but bringing it into movement, and how this is important to understand. Biotensegrity is showing you that, say, you pull somebody's arm, right? As you do that, you notice that you are affecting the fascia. It is sending a fascial signal through the entire system. This shows that we are fractal. We have a fractal communication system through our body, which is the fascia. And James Oshman says it is the most interconnected, all-pervasive system in the body because it connects to every other system, and it's intelligent. The thing is a trauma, whether an addiction or something that actually physically happens to the body, can start to impinge on a part. So let's say it actually causes this. Now your posture is going to be misaligned, right? You have an injury down here, you have a really strong left side, less strong right side, and this will just be your posture. And you will notice there are some people, I have tightness over here, so I sometimes tilt my head like this. It's easier, or more natural, I should say, to tilt my head like this than it is to tilt my head like this. Could be the way that I sleep. It could just be the tightness up here. I am right-handed as much as I've taught myself to use my left hand. There are certain things that we do so much, we don't realize that incrementally they add up over time. And this becomes tight. The right down here where the lat meets the intercostal muscles, that becomes tight. And then this whole thing becomes where you're up here, over here, and this side is starting, you're overly tight over here and then you become loose over here. So biotensegrity is really important. But where I'm getting at with equilibrium and Rafe Kelly and Naudi Aguilar's modalities is you want to know how to keep your fascial integrity strong. And this is why you do things like functional patterns where you don't hyper extend your arms when throwing a punch or when reaching for something. When you're bending over, you understand that even picking up a pencil can throw at your back because you're not just lifting up the pencil, you're lifting your entire body and you're making something happen down by your hips to lift all that weight you have on top of it to lift it back up. That's why we need the rigidity and the formula of functional patterns for our biotensegrity. However, to be able to slightly stretch beyond those bounds has its place, and in that, I believe this is where you will see in the Flow Genome Project, you start hearing about, you have your comfort zone. 4% above your comfort zone, in that range is right where you're going to find the flow state. Not 50, right? Here's your comfort zone. We're going to be extreme about it and we're going to go 50% beyond our comfort zone. No, that's when you get clobbered. That's when you're so afraid that you don't even do what you know your body needs to do, like jumping from this branch to that branch. If that's 20% beyond your comfort zone because it's a long drop down there, your body may know how to do it if it was just a line on the ground and a line on the ground here. You jump and you stand on that line and you're fine, right? But a branch, your psyche gets involved and you may not actually execute it because of the fear. This is why you only slightly bend those boundaries, but you do it repetitively. You do it incrementally, so you keep building and building not only your confidence, but your natural skills and abilities. So the next thing I want to get into, it's not all about movement of the body. Sometimes there's technology that can help us understand what an addiction has done to us. I believe it's not just addictions, really, with things like neurofeedback, which I want to get into right now. Things like neurofeedback can show us however any experience has imprinted itself upon our neurology and how that lends itself to an EEG profile. Now, neurofeedback is really EEG biofeedback. And I showed you in Waking Infinity episode that on the Lex files, where Lex Pelger, a friend of mine, He interviewed a woman named Heather Hargraves, who is somebody that's leading people into neurofeedback and really showing the benefits of it. You take a look at the EEG profile of somebody and you get feedback on what, let's say, an addiction has caused and imprinted upon their EEG profile. And that will inform an expert looking at it to be able to say, I feel like this is how we correct it.
So I was just reading an article about the fractal patterns of the human heart at
Yeah.
a physiological level. It shouldn't be any kind of one system in the heart for how it branches and
Yeah.
things like that. It needs to be somewhat random, yet always repeating in a certain way.
Yeah.
And it's probably true that just expands out through everything.
It does. And that's part of, when I work with people now as a clinician, I'll do a lot of work with heart rate variability. And we know that the more coherent someone's heart rate, the more responsive they are to life. So if someone's too metronomic, it's almost like they're kind of biased and have high expectancy and are a little rigid. And so I often will start with heart rate variability because I want to work with that alpha rhythm, right? That relay station between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind, because I want people to be able to move through the natural states that human consciousness can and also kind of needs to in order for mental health. You need to be able to move into the beta frequencies and also surrender to some of the deep states as kind of like an infinity loop. Like you take stuff from the body, you come up into the consciousness, you make sense of it, then that gets sent back down into the body, and it needs to work together. But when we have rigid vasculature and overwhelmed nervous systems, we can get stuck in repetitive loops that aren't necessarily giving us freedom. They make us kind of stuck.
The expert isn't correcting it. They find a modality for the client to correct it themselves. Here is a dietary change. Here is a lifestyle change. Here is an environmental change. Here is, maybe a psychological or a relationship change. These are all things that will influence you on the inside. So when it comes to addictions, and really the whole point of this, because Oregon decriminalizes drugs, the last thing we need is just to say, that's the right move, let's just decriminalize everything. And the last thing that we need from a drug treatment thing, as I said, basically in Oregon, they're using tax revenue to build a drug addiction treatment program. We've seen these things in the past. We need them to get a little bit more intelligent. They're very dry. Sometimes they're not even really following the science, because most of the science, it comes from very closed sources that are getting paid based upon either the insurance companies or specific technologies that they want you to use. The best way that we can empower people to take health back into their own hands is to show you have this available to you. Once I teach you, and I not only teach you the science of it and the philosophy around it, but also how to commit to it, and then allow you to express it and watch you expressing it, just to make sure that you are following the confines of the discipline, and then you make it your own. And what I've just explained to you is science, philosophy, religion, and art, which are the 4 pillars of any society. You go back as far as possible into our history, or as far across the globe as possible, there's no society without these 4 components. But I believe that's because it's a conscious phenomena. We think scientifically, we think philosophically, yes, we think religiously, and yes, we think artistically. It doesn't matter whether you think that religion has to do with the Christian God or not, and if you think art is playing the guitar or painting something. We are all scientists, philosophers, we're all religious, and we all have art. And I won't go too deeply into this. I'm going to have a whole other course on this specifically, but science is raw data coming at us. It's doing the experiments. It's basically like, what happens when I poke that slug with this stick? I don't suggest that you do that, by the way. What happens when I step on this, what seems to be a very slick surface? That's the science. We're testing things out. We want to know. And then when we get enough feedback and we do it enough, then we can start building a philosophy around it. You see how that's the next step, the next naturally emergent step in consciousness? You test something out, and then you start to build a philosophy around what's happening. We all do this as children. We're born, we want food and we cry and we get it. And so then we want something else, we cry and we get it. We want something else, we cry and we get it. Wow, everything we need, we cry and we get. And then you get to an age and you're like, this doesn't work anymore. Crying is just annoying them, but I want them to play, right? So crying isn't getting them in a playful mood. Maybe I need to try laughing or engaging with them. So science, you try things out. Philosophy, you're starting to come to an understanding about what it might mean. Then religion. After you have a philosophy, you don't just sit idly by like, that's a good philosophy. No, you turn it into something that you can bind yourself to. The word religion comes from religare. Religare means to bind together, to hold two things together. Daniel LaRusso and Mr. Miyagi on the cliffside, mending that broken branch of that bonsai tree. How? They bound it back together with that tape. When they did that, it was able to heal and be whole again, like yoga, which means union with the divine, with all that is. So religion is not just believing in some kind of God and believing a book that was written by people long ago. Religion is that inner process to where we now go from this thing that is just what I've come to know through science, come to believe through philosophy. Now I'm going to devote myself to it. That's religare. That is the religious aspect that we all have. Even if you're just devoting yourself to science and atheism, whatever that is, you've bound yourself to that. That's real religion. The last part of it is art. You express it back out. And you see, now that I believe it, I devote myself to it, I'm going to try it. I try it, now I get feedback from the outside world. What does that do? It informs the new science. So you try it out again. Your philosophy alters itself. Your commitment maybe stays strong, but maybe it starts to unravel itself because you realize that some of your fundamental beliefs were wrong and what you committed yourself to was wrong. Such as an addiction to drugs. Now, if you have an addiction to drugs, this doesn't mean drugs are bad. It means your addiction is showing you that you think A will always lead to B. And then the more you do A, the less it leads to B. So you do more and more and more of A, and the less and less and less it leads to B, until potentially you're degrading your entire health, you're not getting enough nutrition, you're probably not moving enough, you're doing something illegal or something that you believe is bad that you'll get judged for. You have all this emotional shame around it, and it could lead to an overdose, death, could lead to bad decisions. And for the most part, that's what an addiction is. It's the insanity of thinking that you can do the same thing over and over and over again and expect a different result each time. So, this is what I mean about neurofeedback as being, and technology as being a way that we can help find how the modalities are within us. And the last thing I want to leave you with is serotonin and dopamine. An overplayed dopamine pathway is what addiction is all about. But I want to explain this to you. Dopamine is a reward pathway. It helps us plan and think. It has a lot of very interesting aspects to it, but mainly one thing that dopamine does is, let's say you're out on the hunt for food. Now a dog is out hunting something and it's sniffing a trail and it's sniffing and it's sniffing. As it's picking up a scent of something, it is getting a dopamine hit. That dopamine is to cause it to feel exhilarated that it's on the right path. Mind you, the dopamine isn't from getting what you want. It's from realizing you're on the path to getting what you want. Now, bear with me here. If you lose the trail, if that dog, and this could be humans as well, loses that scent, then that dopamine starts to crash and they start to feel agitated. Now, what's paired with dopamine is also norepinephrine and adrenaline. And this is to excite you. But norepinephrine and adrenaline without dopamine cause agitation, irritation. So you can be very irritable if you're not on the right path because you really want what you want. You think so. But when you get that dopamine hit and you realize you're back on the right path, it comes back. Now, when is dopamine the strongest? Not when you get the reward. Not at the end, not at the climax, right? Not when you've fully eaten that animal, but it's right before. It's right before. Because then once you get what you need, you don't need the dopamine anymore. Because for the most part, if we were to look at a very reductionist way, you need food, your body needs to make it advantageous for you to go out and look for food. So dopamine gets you there, but once you got what you need, you just need to fulfill the cycle. And this is why many people say orgasm is great, but it's really all that time leading up to it, all the foreplay and the act of making love. And the orgasm is just that out of control, insane moment. And yes, then right afterwards, there's oxytocin, all this other stuff that's coming out to make you feel really good in that moment. But that's dopamine. Why did I bring up serotonin? Serotonin is a different kind of chemical pathway. It is the one that psychedelics work on. But the interesting thing is without psychedelics, the way that you have a serotonin boost is at the end of the day, you get home from the hunt and you feed your family and you sit down and you look at your family and, let's say your cat or your dog jumps up on your lap and you see this house that you built and you realize that you're warm because somebody built you a fire and you realize this is all right. I have what I've always wanted. I'm grateful for it and I love what I've built. So it's the appreciation and gratitude for what you already have. Dopamine is that exhilaration of what you want, what drives you forward in life, and serotonin seems to be more that appreciation of what you already have. The perfect balance between them is consistently every day. And some people, when you get up in the morning, the first thing you need to do is somehow give yourself a constructive thing to do, like work out or meditate or read or instantly hop into work. Because if you just putz around, that's good for a vacation day, but a lot of the times people feel anxious. They don't know what to do with themselves. Maybe that is a societal imprint, but a lot of people, even when they're on vacation, well after they're retired, they wake up in the morning, first thing they love to do is their ritual, whatever that ritual is. It causes for them to feel, I am back on track. This is my gesture to reality that I am back on track. So, my goals for you, and I would say even a challenge for you, is to begin implementing something first thing in the morning, very first thing in the morning. And I would challenge you to actually wake up a little bit earlier so you can prep yourself to do this, not just to fit it into your quick time zone in the morning, but there's something about waking up earlier rather than waking up later. If I were to have a goal where I was like, okay, wake up 15 minutes later or an hour later, that would be easier, but we're not talking about making things easier. We're talking about introducing a discipline, and it's not the easy thing that gives you that dopamine rush or that serotonin. It's usually the challenge that we overcome. It's that flow state that we get from bending outside at least 4 or around 4%, but no more than 4%, I should say, of our comfort zone. Expanding our horizons, broadening our horizons, and really looking to the future by knowing I am more than my addictions. I am more than my habits. I have so much more potential. Now is the time to introduce habits and rituals every single day, every single morning, first thing in the morning. Set your day off on that trajectory. I think that's the best way to move forward for the entire world. And what I would really like to see is some kind of destabilization of the default mode network, which is where the ego resides. And there's a lot of incredible work coming out of Imperial College London, where the default mode network is destabilized by many things like psychedelics, Wim Hof breathing, meditation, the interesting and novel exercise or novel experiences in general, visualizations, mindfulness practices. See where I'm going with this? Breaking yourself out of rigidity, little by little, incrementally, and moving beyond our comfort zone. I think this is how we really start to break out of our addictions on an individual level. But the next step is, and I pose this question to you, email me, please. I want to get deeper into this conversation. What is the destabilization of the global default mode network? Because it'll have to be societal, it'll have to be economic, it'll have to be environmental, and it will have to be something that reaches deeply into our belief systems about what is real, what is false, what is good, what is bad, and it'll have to start cracking all that crap open. All right. That's about as much as I can give to you today on this deeper dive. Again, I appreciate you so much. Everyone who's been signing up to become a patron, everyone that has signed up so far on benjosephstewart.com here on the deeper dives. I love you guys so much. I'm so excited. Now I'm finally at a point where, after meeting a lot of incredible people who want to start getting into this fold and bringing conscious media to all of you, I think this is the perfect time where we expand. I'm going to be bringing you a lot more content, a lot more value, and I'm going to start structuring it differently to where here I'm going to be giving you actual challenges and bringing you deeper into the understanding of how you can apply the lessons in life. In front of the paywall where, it's all the way out in YouTube land and things like that, really I want to bring to you the topics where we need to address the elephant in the room. How do we address that? That is benjosephstewart.com membership, and that is going to be the patrons on Patreon. And those who get the higher level memberships really are going to start being a part of the roundtable conversations, Zoom meetings, actually having a say in where we move forward. And I just have to say, there are some incredible people coming into the fold and really wishing to bring this thing to the next level. If you've noticed, everyone out there and their cousins are trying to make some kind of free speech platform. There's an umbrella that connects them all, and it's building right now. I'll leave you with that. Much love to you guys, and I'll catch you guys next time on Waking Infinity Deeper Dive.